So tonight we are learning, we're learning Le'ilu Nishmat Shmahayahu Yosef Chaim Ben Yaakov Yisrael, which is obviously Rav Chaim Kanievsky. We're also learning Le'ilu Nishmat Avram Ben Chaim Yehuda and Yechaskel Ben Avraham. We are also learning tonight the Refuah Shlema to Shlomo Bat Elizabeth, Ruth Bat Malka, Dan Ben Pel, and for strength, for Koach, for Margalit Bat Regina. Okay, so before we begin today, I actually have to say a tremendous thank you to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Ephraim Krohn from Yerushalayim, which I spoke to him, yesterday or 2 days ago, for quite some time, gathering some information and gaining some stories and gaining a lot of things. So he gave me a lot of time. So I want to thank Rabbi Ephraim Krohn, my brother-in-law. But anyways, now let's get to the start of dealing with the huge loss that Klal Yisrael went through. Klal Yisrael recently, there's no other way to say it, lost, the Gadol Hadar, where nobody else is on, his level. And I have to say, from all the Gedolim, in the past recent years, even compared to my Rosh Yeshiva that were Gedolim, I had a particular close affinity or connection to Reb Chaim more than anybody else. So this really affected me to an utmost degree, and I really wanted to speak about him and about things that we can take to learn from it. So one of the important things is whenever you go to or whenever you listen to class about listening to a gadol or a hesped for a gadol, a eulogy for a gadol, you have to, it's not just about wow, this person was so amazing, so great, and it's so unbelievable, and we lost a great thing, which obviously, yes, it is a part of it, but there's also, as Rav David Cohen, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, goes and says, in the Gemara and Brachos, page 6b, goes and says, Amar Rav Sheshes, Agra de Hispeda diluye. Rav Sheshes says in the Gemara and Brachos that the primary reward for delivering a eulogy is to cause those in the eulogy to raise their voices and cry. But Rav David Cohen goes and uses using the terminology of diluye to, instead of using it from crying, but rather from like a pail where you put it in the water and you draw things out. So just like a pail, you draw from a well water, from a hesped, you're supposed to draw things out from your own personal life to change them, to do something and change them in your own personal life. The idea is that when you hear all these amazing things, you should do something to change your life. Something small, something big, whatever it is that you're able to do. And really that is the focus that we're going to be trying to gain today. There's going to be a lot of stories today. So there's going to be a lot of, some personal, some that I read, some that are floating around. But there's a lot of information out there, and people don't realize that there is another step that they're missing when they just hear the story that's taken into their own personal, own personal life. The Pasuk in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes, if I'm saying it correctly, in chapter 3, from verse 2 to verse, and moving on, the famous verse, what Shlomo Malach tells us, there's a eis laledes, ve'eis lamos, eis lifkais, ve'eis lifkais. There's a time to laugh, there's a time to cry. There's a time to give birth, and there's a time to die. So there was a question that was asked to Rav Chaim, and that was, what do you mean that there's a time to die? When is it a good time to die? When is let's die? How do we understand that there's a time to be born? Fine, but there's mazalot, there's different times where it's more auspicious for the baby. I get that, but when is a good time to die? So Rav Chaim goes and says that a good time to die is Erev Shabbos. Why? Because the mazikim, the damagers, the damaging angels, they can't do anything during that time. And on Motzei Yom Kippur. Why? Because they got a kapara right after Yom Kippur. And the Zohar, and by the way, this people, usually say as Purim is like Yom Kippur, and it's so nice because you could get so hard, say to him, and you could get my shidduch. You don't realize it. The Zohar says this. The Zohar says that Purim is like Yom Kippur. And there's different levels that we're able to reach on Purim that we're not able to reach on any other day of the year. And it's very interesting. And there's a kapara. There's a Kabbalah Satara. There's a kapara that we get on Yom Kippur, assuming that you tap into that power. The thing that Chaim Kanievsky said is, when is a good time to die? Erev Shabbos and Motzei Yom Kippur. When did he die? Erev Shabbos and Motzei Purim, which is just like, as according to the Zohar, of Motzei Yom Kippur. Just so if you begin to realize of like the most auspicious time possible, that Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippurim. It's a Yom like Purim, meaning that Purim is a higher level per se. So to realize of when he was nifter, and I don't want to, go into the details of just how it worked out. It was a few hours before Shabbos, and they couldn't go and do the Levaya before Shabbos. They had to wait till after Shabbos. So it was like one thing after another that you could see that it was just Min HaShamayim, that it had to be specifically at that time. And not only that, the thing that sort of hit me the most is I didn't even have a chance to daven. I got. My sister lives in Bnei Brak, a few blocks away from Reb Chaim, and my nephew was there, who happens to have WhatsApp. The rest of the family doesn't have. Well, he has WhatsApp, so we got a message on the family chat that Reb Chaim fell. Please go daven. And we're it was how do we begin to understand? What do you get information? You're like, what? You can't. You're freeze. You're like, wait, what? And then, a few minutes later, it wasn't that much longer, where we got the information that, it was Baruch Emes. And I was like, wait, that can't be true. That has to be false. That doesn't make any sense. And I quickly go on all the websites that have all the, Jewish news, and none of them mention anything about Chaim was nifter. So I was like, in my mind, it didn't happen. I don't know why this is where I draw my line of my information, where I get it from the websites. But whatever it was, is this is where I'm saying no, it wasn't there. So I was still saying to him, I was still going through it. And about, I don't know, maybe a half hour later, the websites came out with, unfortunately, the news with Baruch Emes, which, was just interesting how long it took. Because when my nephew gave me the news of Baruch Emes, that's when already the information only came out to say Tehillim. It didn't even come out that he was nifter. It was a half hour or 45 minutes behind. But in any ways, it took me in such a shock, because no one was expecting this. It's one thing if the gadol is sick and everyone's davening and you're ready for it, but then it just takes you by storm. You're you're not ready for it. How do we deal with it? And it was a very, very troubling Shabbos for many, and it was a very troubling week for many. How do we deal with the gadol adar leaving us? We're left as a nation without a leader, so to speak. And I think it's very important to realize what type of person we just lost. To realize the godless of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. To realize that, his day consisted of very little sleep. The majority of the day, and I want to say, I don't know, maybe about 20 hours, was done fully of learning Torah, but in between those breaks of learning Torah was seeing people, davening, whatever it is, chesed and Torah, non-stop, around the clock. And people don't understand when, there was a WhatsApp going around of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and I posted on my status myself, but I'm saying Rav Chaim Kanievsky, 11, pages of this, 7 blot of this, all these things. We don't begin to understand that Rav Chaim Kanievsky finished every year, the Mishnah, the Talmud Bavli, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Nach, the Rambam, the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, with the commentaries, the Mishnah Berurah, the Medrash Rabbah, the Medrash Tanchuma, the Sifra, the Sifri, the Tosefta, and the Zohar. Now, just to get the understanding of this, majority of the people do not get to finish this in their lifetime. Yet Rav Chaim Kanievsky finished this every single year. And what he called it, when he was learning, he called it his chavot, his chovos, his obligation, his debts, if you want to translate it literally. There was an avrech that had a lot of chovos, had a lot of debt, and it was disturbing his learning. And it was disturbing his shalom bayis, as financial problems unfortunately do cause. And so he goes over to Rav Chaim and he says to Rav Chaim, I have so much debt that I can't concentrate on my learning. My shalom bayis is breaking. I can't do anything. So Rav Chaim looks at him and he says, I also have debt. What do you mean? Rav Chaim's debt is the learning that he has to do, that he calls it the chovos, the debt. So the Avrech was with all due respect, my dear Rabbi, he says, your debt and my debt are very different. My debt is financial. He says, it causes a big issue. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky goes to him and looks at him and says, if you do my debt, then you won't have your debt. If you do my chovos, you won't have your chovos. Meaning, if you finish what I finished, then you're not going to have any worries about it. So this Avrech was like, that's nice, but like, there's no way that I'm finishing, Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch. Like, where am I going to, the Zohar, forget about it. Like, how am I going to finish it? So Rav Chaim goes and says to him, you know what? Start with the Bavli. And by the way, it's no easy feat to finish the Talmud Bavli in 1 year. And to finish it in 1 year, you have to learn a little bit more than 7 blot a day, which about, if anybody learns, Daf Yomi, it takes close to an hour to learn one of those pages. So to finish 7 is a big feat. So this is what Reb Chaim said. So he decided he's going to take upon himself, and he started learning 7 blot a day. A few weeks of him learning this, where he was learning in Kol full time. They heard what he was doing, and within a short period of time, they raised all the money that he needed. And look what Reb Chaim said. Reb Chaim Kanievsky said, "You take on my debt." He said, "You can't do that. Fine, do Talmud Bavli, and don't worry about it. Everything else will taken care of." Within a few short weeks, his entire debt was canceled. All the money was raised, and it was done. Usually, on the years that there was a leap year, like this past year, where there's 2 months of Adar, Reb Chaim Kanievsky would finish, his learning. He had an extra month, so he would finish it usually Erev Purim. He would finish it before Purim, and he would take that extra month to write a sefer. And people say this when they speak about it. They say this like as a matter of fact. I'm like, do you know what that means? Like, will you just take a month off to write it? People spend years writing a sefer. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky would take a month off, well, not a month off, I'm saying, but he would take a month and he was like, yeah, let's publish this sefer over here. We don't understand that godless. But you know what's so interesting? This year, it was, there was 2 Adars. Every year, Reb Chaim Kanievsky finishes his siyum on Erev Pesach. But this year, he finished it Erev Purim. Which, look at how HaKadosh Baruch Hu did it. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the ability to go and finish another whole set of his siyumim. He finished it exactly on Erev Purim, then came Purim, and Mamish Shushan Purim, the day after Purim, that's when he was nifter. You would think that you have a gadol, so he would live like a king. He would live like an unbelievable amount of money that goes through him, the amount of money that people want to give him. And in fact, there was a wealthy person that one came to visit him, and he looked at her, he looked at the house, and I don't know if anybody here has visited the house. I've been there, it was my zchut to be there a few times, and the house is less than simple. Like, forget about like the necessities. Even in Israel standards, it's considered a simple house. And there was a wealthy man that said, let me build you a spacious house. And the entire Reb Chaim Kanievsky, they said, no, absolutely not. They said, because you have so many people coming to him to visit him, this encourages people that they see the economic hardship that they live by, that still they're able to devote themselves to Torah study. Because people will think, okay, fine. So Reb Chaim, he became such a great man, and he lives in such a beautiful house, and he has so many people running after and serving him. That's why he's able to sit and learn. For 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day. What am I saying? 12 hours a day. When I say 15 hours a day, 20 hours a day. That's what he's able to learn. But if I had that, then maybe I'll be able to do an hour and a half. But when you think about it, he said, no, I don't want a fancy house, because I want people to realize that you're able to follow and you're able to live a Torah lifestyle. You're able to learn and devote yourself entirely to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even living simply. There was once a group of Bachrim that went to get bracha from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So they all lined up, one after another, and Reb Chaim went and he, looked at each bacher, gave him a bracha, his regular, either the buah or the bracha v'atzlacha, and everyone said amen, and they went one by one. When they came to one particular boy, Reb Chaim sort of passed him over. He sort of ignored him and went to the other guy. So the boy thought, okay, maybe Reb Chaim missed that I was here, so he went back to the back of the line and sort of did a double take and waited in the line again. And then when the boy came in time to speak to Reb Chaim again skipped him over. So the boy was like, what's going on? So he went to his Rebbe, who came there with them, and he says, I don't know, I went on the line, Reb Chaim ignored me. I went on the line again, and he ignored me again, like, should I go again? Like, I don't know what to do. So at this point, the boys were outside in another room, and the Rebbe said, "Let me go and ask Reb Chaim, then maybe I'll call you back in." So this Rebbe goes out and he says to Reb Chaim, he says, "You missed a boy, twice. He came to you." And Reb Chaim says, "Yeah, but he says, how can I give a bracha to somebody who does not concern himself? He's unconcerned with the laws of basar v'chalav, of milk and meat that he eats together." And the Rebbe was not. He was like, "No, it's like this is a boy in yeshiva. He's a good boy." He's like, and Reb Chaim, said like, "No, how can I'm not going to give a bracha to somebody who is not dealing with the halachas of eating milk and meat together." So the Rebbe didn't know what to say. He went back to the boy and he told him. He says, "I don't know what to tell you, but this Reb Chaim said that. He says that he can't give you a bracha because you're not you don't follow the laws, the halachas of milk and meat." And suddenly, the boy started bawling, crying. And the Rebbe was like taking it back. He's like, "What's going on?" And the boy goes and he says, we have at lunch, we have meat. And when it comes time for second Seder, which is about an hour or so afterwards, I go and I make a coffee with milk. And he started crying and he says, it was a difficult test, and he goes and he says, "But I promise I'll change myself, I'll do tshuva, I'll do whatever." And he goes on and he says, "Please, speak to her." So he goes back to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim goes to him and he says, and now he gives him a bracha. After the boy leaves again, the Rebbe, and the Gabbai go over to the Reb Chaim and he says, how did you know? How did you even begin to know? So Reb Chaim was trying to downplay the fact that he knew it, and he was like, because the Rebbe asked him, he says, "Are you a Navi? Are you a prophet? How did you see that?" So the Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes and says, "No, I'm not a Navi, I'm not a prophet." He said, it's simply this, I saw the image of a goat on his forehead. And Chazal tell us that somebody who does an Aveira with basar v'chalav, with milk and meat, has the image of a goat on its forehead. And Reb Chaim was trying to downplay the fact that he just read someone's forehead. And he goes and he says, the Arizal goes and writes that any Aveira, any sin that a person does, there corresponds to a different image that appears on a person's face. And he goes and says that, the Tadikim, the righteous people, they're able to see these images and they're able to advise the people on the correct ways on which to do tshuva. So this is how Reb Chaim tried to downplay it. And there's without a doubt that there are numerous stories where Reb Chaim was able to see things that nobody else can see. There was another story where a group of modern American boys came in to get a bracha, about 20 guys. And two guys, again, Reb Chaim skipped. So one of the Rebbeim went over and he says, you missed two of the guys. And Reb Chaim goes and he says, "I'm sorry, I don't give the brachas to the, to the non-Jews that are in here." And they were like, "No, Reb Chaim, no, Rebbe, it's the boys from the yeshiva. These are boys from the yeshiva." And Chaim says, "I'm not giving brachas to non-Jews." And that was the end of it. That was the end of the conversation. And the Gabbai went and told the Rebbe, he says, "Look into it, see what happened, what's going on with this family." And it turns out that one of these boys' mothers didn't convert, just pretended that she converted and she went to her child was non-Jewish. The other boy, his mother converted conservative, which, you could take that conservative conversion and, make a paper airplane and fly it over the Jordan River. That's exactly what it's going to be useful for. So you see Reb Chaim had, and by the way, there was numerous stories. There was a chassid that came in a few days before his wedding to get a bracha from Reb Chaim Kanievsky for his marriage. Reb Chaim looks at him and he says, "Your kala isn't Jewish." And he was, this is a chassid that you're dealing with. And it turns out that his kala's mother converted conservative. Didn't convert it conservative. How were you able to see this? I want to share with you, a story that I heard personally from the person. There was a doctor that came in from America that was supposed to go see Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He was supposed to go see with Rav Simcha Scheinberg. Rav Simcha Scheinberg wasn't able to, so he went. I'll just tell you who it was. I don't think he's going to care. It's my brother-in-law, Rabbi Ephraim Krohn. He went over to Rabbi Ephraim Krohn and he said, "I can't take the doctor to Reb Chaim. Can you please take him to the doctor?" So my brother-in-law, Rabbi Ephraim Krohn, said, "Yeah, not a problem." This doctor was a dentist, and they take him to Reb Chaim, and like the Gabbai, I guess, misunderstood something, and the Gabbai goes over to Reb Chaim, and he says, "This doctor is from America. He is an eye doctor." And Reb Chaim looks at him, and he says, "No, he's a dentist." And the Gabbai is like, "No, he's an eye doctor." Because in Hebrew, Einayim, Rofeh Einayim is an eye doctor, Rofeh Shinayim is a dentist. So it's very similar. So I guess the Gabbai misunderstood it. So the Gabbai is telling Reb Chaim, here's the Rofeh Einayim, the eye doctor. Reb Chaim says, no, it's Rofeh Shinayim. And they're going back and forth, and all of a sudden, Reb Chaim looks at the doctor, smiles at him, covers his mouth, and he says, no, Rofeh Shinayim. And he goes over to the mouth dentist and says, don't look at my teeth. He goes over to him. And this is where and they were sitting in the room over there. I heard this from my brother-in-law who was sitting with the Reb Chaim when this happened. Nobody told Reb Chaim that he was the dentist. They told him that he was an eye doctor. There was nothing else that was mentioned on it. Like, how do you even begin to do you even begin to understand what level this is on? I'll tell you two stories that happened to me personally that I definitely said this before. I don't know who heard it from the class over here before. So one time I went with my I think it's all my brothers. I'm pretty sure it's all my brothers. We went to Reb Chaim. We were zocha to have a little bit of a connection and to be able to get in when people were not, usually there. We were able to get in without a line, so we come in over there, and Reb Chaim is sitting, and he's I'm looking at my wall over there because I have to show you a picture. But let me say this part of the story. Reb Chaim is sitting and he's learning Gemara. No, in order to understand the story, give me like a second. I have to show you this picture. Hold on one second. Just so you understand what we're talking about. I don't know why I didn't think to bring about this earlier. Okay, so one of the times when I was in Eretz Yisrael, I went with my son and actually my nephew over here. Hold on one second. Let me just put my mic back on. To get a bracha. I don't know if you could see that over there. To get a bracha from, there's the thing, from Chaim Kanievsky. And this is how, I don't know if you, I don't know, there's a little bit of a glare, so I apologize. But this is how when you go see Reb Chaim, this is what it looks like. You go there, and people are snapping pictures, and Reb Chaim is sitting there, and he's just learning. He has I don't know if you could see from the picture, but he has a little index card that he mamish just goes down the page as he's learning. And there are people that are talking around him. There's a whole commotion, and literally, me, my son, and my nephew are sitting over here, and I'm taking a picture with him. Like this is, and he doesn't even blink. There's like flash. He's just like learning the entire time. He's completely focused on on his learning. And when his gabbai, which is usually his grandson or one of his children or one of the gabbai, they come and they say, and they give him they say this person is here for this bracha and so on and so forth. They come in, he looks up and he gives them the bracha. So this is how it happened, not this time, a different time, where we went to Reb Chaim with all my brothers, and we go and Reb Chaim is sitting over there, completely zoned into his learning, and we'll soon see how zoned in that he actually was. And he's zoned in on his learning, and me, my father, my brothers were all walking in, and suddenly Reb Chaim looks up. Usually doesn't. He looks up, looks at my older brother. I don't know if I'm calling it out of this. I don't know. He looks at my older brother, and he says, Tolid Tashon. Take off the watch. Reb Chaim was very against watches. Watches, from Beged Isha, whatever it was, he had, I think he's got watches. Now, my brother came in with a suit, with a hat. There's no way that he saw the watch. And he looked up, zoned in instantly on my brother, and said, to take off the watch. And it was like, where did that even come from? My brother was like, I didn't even know, he throws it across the room. Like, I don't have a watch, I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't even, it wasn't even mentioned to us. This is one of the first earlier times that we came in. And he came in, literally, there was no, mention of it. There was he didn't even, he wasn't like he was looking. He just looked up and he knew that somebody had a watch. I'm telling you, it was I don't want to say the weirdest thing, but it was was like, what just happened? Like, I don't know what to say anymore. Like, it was, was there a magician over here? Like, I feel like I just witnessed a magic act. Like this doesn't, lahavdil, alfe, elf adolfs. And then it was funny because there was another person that once came to Reb Chaim Kanievsky wearing a watch. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes over to him and says, why are you wearing a watch? And he says, no, Rabbi, I wore it on my other hand. He's outsmarting the gadol over here. So I wore it on my other hand. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky looks at him as if he's outside. He says, wear it on your leg next time. And then he goes back to learning as if he's going, like he's outsmarting him. But I want to share with you another story that happened with me with Rabbi Chaim. This was about 4 years ago. I went to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, and I went and I had a whole list of I don't know, it was more brachas that I was asking for him, and then one for refuah shlema. And I'm sure that you guys, people from the have heard it, from the regular class. So for a refuah shlema for a certain, I'll tell you who it was actually. It was for my wife's very close friend, and what happened was that she was in labor and she had an embolism and she went into a coma. And she was in a coma for about 2 months at this point in time. And I went over to Reb Chaim, asking for a bracha for refuah shlema, and I asked him for a whole list of things. And I asked him for a refuah shlema for this woman, her name was Miriam Bas Bracha. And Reb Chaim went and gave me a bracha on all the things that I asked with through the gabbai. And however, he skipped the refuah shlema for Miriam Bas Bracha. So I went over back to the gabbai. I'm saying, the Rav missed, the refuah shlema. Can the Rav get and the gabbai asked again, and Reb Chaim ignored it. So I'm sitting over there, like every second, you can't, it's a gadol dar, you can't like waste time. And I tried twice. I said, fine, no. I called my wife up. I said I tried, and this is what happened. She said, okay, fine, thank you for trying. That was the end of it. A month and a half later, about 6 weeks later, she passed away. She was nifter. And I went to the Shiva house to pay, obviously, the Shiva call, and I spoke to the brother-in-law, one of the brother-in-laws. And the brother-in-law mentioned to me that he went to Reb Chaim, and, he went to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim, he asked for a bracha, for a refuah shlema, and Reb Chaim ignored it. And I didn't even register this. After I left the Shiva house, I called my wife, and I was like, by the way, this is what his, the brother-in-law says. And my wife was like, don't you remember? Like, this happened to you also. Like, you asked Reb Chaim for a bracha and he ignored it. This brother-in-law, completely different, like not the same time at all. He came maybe a month before me, asked Reb Chaim, can I ask for a bracha? And Reb Chaim ignored it. And this was like something that baffled me. Like, in my mind, this is how I interpret it, that he realized that this woman is not going to make it, so he just ignored the entire question entirely, not only to me, twice, but also to the brother-in-law. I don't know how many times he asked it. And this is a level that, do you understand? Like, we don't even begin to understand, the level of godless that we have over here, that we had, over here. There was a famous story where there was a frum guy from New Jersey that was involved in a terrible car accident. He killed a old non-Jewish man in an accident. And he went to court, and they found him non-guilty, and because it wasn't his fault, and he wasn't held by any means that he had to nothing. He was completely not guilty. However, he had no peace of mind. He killed a person. It's like there's a person not alive anymore because of him, and he lost his appetite. He wasn't able to sleep. So he decided he's going to go and he's going to send a question to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So he went over to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He sent it over. He sent over a question to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, his entire situation. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky responded with one word. And that one word was Amalek. And the guy was like, he didn't understand the question. He said, he went into an accident and this, and the guy died. And the only word that he got was Amalek. He didn't know what that meant. That didn't mean anything to him. So, he just kept on. Again, he couldn't fall asleep. He was many sleepless nights. He decided at some point that he has to move out of his house. Mishana Makkah, Mishana Mazal, he has to change his environment. He couldn't live like this. So he began searching for a new house, and he found a certain house that the sellers were very eager to sell. What happened is that they inherited from this house from their father who died a few months earlier, and they wanted to just get rid of it. So he goes under contract, and I believe he buys a house. and he buys a house, and I don't know if it's before closing or after closing, he finds out that this apartment, this house, whatever it was, who did it belong to? It belonged to none other than the person that he just killed in the car accident a few months ago. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, can I not get away from this? Like literally, like out of all the houses that I search and buy, I find a house that the person that died in the accident. So he has the house now. He goes and he starts, cleaning it up. It was a little bit messy. He goes into the basement. He finds this like room that the previous owners forgot to clear out. It was like a hidden compartment, and he sees there's a box in there. He opens this box and he sees that it's a Nazi uniform. It's an SS uniform, and he digs a little bit deeper, and he finds that there was a picture of this person who owned the house together with Adolf Hitler, together with him together. And not only that, he does even more research. Listen to this story, like, I would say you can't even make it up, but the only way that it makes sense is if you make it up. You think so, but this was a real story. He goes on, and the Nazis were very meticulous in their details that they kept. This Nazi, this SS officer, he had there a list of names of all the Jewish people that he killed. I guess this was his pride and glory. This was his prized possession. And he's going through the list, and all of a sudden, the owner of the house starts turning white and starts shaking. Who does he see on the list? None other than his own two parents that were murdered in the Holocaust, were murdered by none other than this Nazi who ran to America, to New Jersey to escape. But what happened? How did the divine intervention work out? That his son ended up killing, obviously unintentionally, his parents. How? There's nothing like, how do you even begin to this is like a story that a writer writes, like how everything plugs in and then they make it into a movie and then it becomes a blockbuster or whatever it is, it becomes a big thing. Like, this is Reb Chaim saw the question, says Amalek, and that was it. And now all of a sudden he realized what Reb Chaim Kanievsky meant. This is somebody that was just nifter, lived in our generation. Our generation. There was a person that bought an apartment in Israel, and his neighbor, only after he moved in, found out that he was, how do you say this in the nicest way, was connected to a corporation that deals in the underworld, if you know what I'm talking about. They don't deal in the legal sense of things. They like to go above and beyond. I don't want to say lifnim mishur sadin, but above mishur sadin. Basically, they take the matters into their own hands. Basically, it was a guy that was connected to the underworld, and he had a huge hatred towards Jews, like huge. And when he found out that a religious Jew moved, as his next door neighbor, he went, and at every Shabbos he would blast this like disgusting music so they wouldn't be able to enjoy. And if the family left, some sort of toys in the shared courtyard, he would go and he would destroy them, and he would really cause them so much trouble. And they were, going through. They even tried to go through authorities, and the authorities were like, they didn't want to. The authorities themselves didn't want to deal with it. That's how well this guy was connected. They're like, well, there's nothing that we could do. So they decided they're going to sell the house. They can't live here anymore. So they found a person. Nobody wanted to buy the house because they realized what was going on. They found a person that was willing to buy it, but he lowballed them on such a low offer they would lose a ton of money of what they originally put in. But they decided, what are they going to do? They can't live here anymore. So they were willing to go through that loss, but they decided before selling it, let's go get a bracha from Reb Chaim. So they went to Reb Chaim for a bracha, and Reb Chaim goes over to him and says, no, don't sell it. And they're like, wait, what? And Reb Chaim goes over to him and he says, wait until he runs away. All right? When you have a gadol like that say something, you don't say anything, all right, you say thank you, and you amen, and you leave. 2 weeks later, exactly 2 weeks later, there was a truck that drove, on the curb, by accident, and hit an electric pole, and took out all the wires. It was a surge in all the wires, and the neighbor's expensive security system was all off. It must have been a day or two after that his home was robbed, and he lost about a little bit over $1 million in this robbery. And this neighbor, this non-Jewish, whatever, I don't know if he was not Jewish. I'm pretty sure he was Jewish. But he fell into such a depression that the other neighbors didn't see him for the next 3 months, and they had like peace, quiet, tranquility. They had happiness for the first time. And a short while later, about a few months after that, they were approached by a real estate broker. And the real estate broker went and they told him that there's a developer that wants to build a new building on the site of your property, and this developer offered them a larger apartment in a new building and a significant sum of money in exchange for their permission to build on their property. And they go, and the real estate agent goes over, and this is the key. He goes over to this from guy, and he says, we already purchased the rights from your neighbor, the problematic neighbor, and the neighbor said something very weird. He says he just wants to run away from this entire area. Those are the exact words that he used. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, wait until he runs away. How do you even begin to explain these things? On Rosh Hashanah, there was a story that came out that one time they saw Reb Chaim Kanievsky was like a little bit on the downside. I can't say down, but he said it was very hard for him, what was going on. And they went over to him and says, I don't know if it's one of his children, one of his grandchildren. He says, what's bothering you? And he goes and he says, before Rosh Hashanah, there's a lot of people that come to me for brachos. And, I see people that are not going to, they're decreed that not going to make it throughout the year. And he says, it hurts me, it bothers me, I don't know, and it brings him down, it brings him sad. Like the level that, we don't realize. I always think about it, I'm like, don't you wish you heard these stories 2 years ago so that you would be able to go? But you know what the funny thing is that these stories were around a few years ago. They were around. For some reason, just people don't speak about it. Maybe we should, so it will be an embarrassing thing for people, but maybe like the people that speak in public should just speak about all the Tadikim in the generation and just spill the beans, what they had. But the answer really is that a lot of these Tadikim don't want this information out there. They don't want. Why? Because then they're going to be bothered. They want to sit and learn. That's what they want to do. They want to do Avodas Hashem. But in any case, it's crazy to realize of what we had. We had this in our generation. Exactly a week ago, he was still alive. We had this. We had. We in our generation, we had the ability. There was once a yeshiva student that went to visit Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He wanted to get a bracha for finding a shidduch, and he had a very hard time finding a shidduch. Why? Because he had a huge scar across his face. And Reb Chaim goes, and he always used to hide how he got the scar. He tried to hide the fact. Reb Chaim goes over to him and he says, the next girl that you date, tell her exactly how you got the scar. So he says, okay. Gadol tells you to do something, you do something. So the next date that he goes on, he goes and he tells the girl exactly what happened. He said that there was an Arab that was chasing a Haredi family, a Frum family, and he saw it and he tried to stop it, so he ran after it. But the Arab, instead of going and continue chasing the Haredi, he went and he chased this boy himself, and he took the knife and he sliced it through his face, and that's how he got the scar. And the girl who's sitting across from him listens to it. Her mouth opens up and she's like, what? And before the boy has a chance to respond, she's like, that was my family. You were the guy? You're the... Long story short, they were engaged within a few days. All right? That was the end of the story. They were engaged in a few days. You look at it, how do you even begin to explain these types of stories? And you hear these stories of these miraculous stories, and by the way, they go on for you could go on for hours on these stories. And you think, okay, fine, you had such a high nisham, you have such a high, lofty person like Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he was able to do it. We have to realize that we were all human. Reb Chaim Kanievsky was human, we're human, all the Gedolim before him we're all human beings. So how did he merit, again, who am I to say how he merited? I can't even begin to say that. But when we understand the way that what is a gadol, what is a tzaddik, that tzaddik doesn't make a miracle. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a miracle, but the tzaddik is an extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The tzaddik gets so close to Hashem that they're, an extension. I give you a mashal that my brother-in-law gave. I thought it was beautiful. And he was like, when you have a wealthy, multi-millionaire businessman, successful businessman, and the businessman says, I don't have time to deal with all the collectors, and he goes to his secretary, and he says, you deal with all the collectors. And the collectors call her, and she writes out checks one after another. $1,000 for here, $1,500 for here, $2,000 for here, $2,500 for here. Meanwhile, she barely makes $1,000 a week. But she's writing out checks for thousands of dollars. Why? Because she's not writing, it's not her own personal, it's the businessman's checks. It's all the businessman's money. When we realize what a gadol is someone that attaches themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that they're sort of an extension. That they have the power, the ability to give those brachas because they have that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They have that close connection. Now, we hear these stories, we'll be like, I find only the God, yes, a gadol could do, but we tend to forget the fact that we have the ability to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu also. We have the ability to go and give get that power as well if we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, it's beyond us, to even begin to fathom the connection of a gadol like Reb Chaim Kanievsky had. But that doesn't stop us from getting at least a small connection. Something small, at least you could get that. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, as well as many gedolim, they didn't put into their head anything else. They didn't memorize anything else unless it was connected to the Torah. One time, Reb Chaim Kanievsky was walking, and he was learning. In his mind, he was learning. And he finds himself by the Coca-Cola Factory. And anybody who's visited Bnei Brak knows this Coca-Cola Factory, because as you enter Bnei Brak, there is a Coca-Cola Factory. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky looks at this, and he's like, he's obviously lost. He has no idea how he got there. And there was someone that was driving by, and he notices that Reb Chaim Kanievsky is like near the Coca-Cola Factory. So he pulls over. He goes over to Reb Chaim, and he says, Kvod Harav, what are you doing here? And Reb Chaim says, I don't know. I don't know. So, Reb Chaim, so he goes over to Reb Chaim and says, let me take you to where you need to go. So Reb Chaim says, I don't want to be matriach you. I don't want to, I don't want to disturb you. And he says, no. He says, let me take you. And Reb Chaim says, you take me until I recognize, the driver says, I'll take you until you recognize the area and then I'll drop you off. This way. So Reb Chaim says, fine. So they drive into Bnei Brak and he goes, you recognize the street? Nope. You recognize the street? Nope. He goes in until he's like a block and a half away from his house. And he goes to he says, you recognize this street? Reb Chaim says, no, I don't recognize this. Until he reaches Rehov Rashbam, which is where Reb Chaim lives. And he pulls up like close to where his house is. And Reb Chaim says, oh, I recognize here. He says, this place I recognize. Reb Chaim Kanievsky traveled to Brissim, he was sandik to so many places, knew nothing. He knows where his house is. That's about it. But how to get there, beyond it. That's not it. There's a story that said, I believe it's from Rab Shach, where his wife asked him to buy a watermelon. So he says, fine. He goes, he buys a watermelon, and how do you hold a watermelon? You hold it like a football, like a baby, it's a heavy thing. So he's walking, he's going and he's walking home, and somewhere along the road, the watermelon just slipped and fell out of Rav Shach's hands. But Rav Shach was so engrossed in his learning that he kept on walking. But he kept on walking as if he's carrying something. So he's walking and learning, and meanwhile, he's walking holding nothing. There was nothing there. Why? Because his mind was not even there. Mind was only learning Torah. There's a story about the stipler, which is Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father, that one time somebody was cleaning next to him, and there was a shmata, and there was a little bowl of water. And they were dipping in the bowl in the water, and they were cleaning whatever was around them. And the stipler was learning, and he thought someone brought him soup. So he started drinking, the water. He thought that this was his soup, until he realized, no, this is not this is shemata, thing like that. And it wasn't like he would have realized. He would have finished the bowl. And then he would have gone over to his wife and said, that was delicious, thank you very much. It was amazing. This is the level. And in fact, Rebbetzin Kanievsky related a story about Reb Chaim. And she goes and says that one time she accidentally locked herself out of her house. And the only person that was home was Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he was learning. So she knocked on the door, knocked. And she said no one was answering. 20 minutes go by, and finally Reb Chaim Kanievsky heard something, so he goes over to open the door. but his head is still learning. Like he walks over to open the door, he opens the door, outside is his Rebbitzin, his wife. He opens the door, he's in his learning, he's not looking, he's like in his mind, and he goes and he says, I'm sorry, the Rebbitzin is not home, please come back later. He tells this to his Rebbitzin who's sitting outside. And the Rebbitzin looks at him and she's like, Chaim, it's me. It's like, let me. And then he let him in. This is what the Rebbitzin said. Like he opened the door, he was in his mold, he was learning. That's where he was. You know what a lesson that we could learn from that? Okay, fine. So maybe we're not in the lesson that we're walking in the street holding an empty watermelon, or maybe drinking a shmata thing of pail of water, or maybe answering the door and saying, I'm sorry, my wife is. If you answer the door and you say, I'm sorry, my wife is not home, there's going to be questions that's going to be asked, right? Reb Chaim could say that. You cannot say that. Don't pretend. But when you think about it, the level of concentration, the level of focus that these Gedolim had was completely involved in Torah. So we can't say, maybe I can't reach that level. But maybe the next time that you listen to a shir, maybe the next time you open a sefer, focus. Concentrate just a little bit. We all know we have levels of concentrations, levels of focus. Whether you're in college, whether you're working, whether you're learning, there's levels of focus. And sometimes you're able to reach that focus on a higher level. Some people take extracurricular, Adderalls, I don't know what others say, to get their focus in line, what they need to focus and study, and things like that. But imagine, just for a minute, that the next time that you focus, that you learn, that you put your full concentration. And maybe you're not able to do that for a full hour of a shir, or a full half hour that you're opening up a sefer or learning, but maybe for 5 minutes. Maybe for 5 minutes you could give it super duper focus, like steroid level focus, like nitro level focus, whoever knows what I'm talking about, like a focus that you're I'm zoned into here and nothing else in the world exists. We may not able to do that 20 hours a day, which these Gedolim were able to, but for 5 minutes, maybe that we could do. Maybe that is something that we take out when we realize, these Gedolim were able to be so focused in that, maybe we could be that. The Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, Rav David Cohen, goes and said that the Vilna Gaon, the Gra says in Siach Yitzchak, that we daven, we say in the morning, V'targelenu b'sar sechal, and in that the parish of the Gra is that everybody inside is built in with a love of Torah, a desire of Torah, the sweetness of Torah. We have it all inside of us. We may not be able to tap into it, but it's all inside of us. We think that, okay, fine, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Reb Shach, the Stipler, Reb Eliashev, these are the Gedolim, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, these are the Gedolim, they were able to, they had this love. He says, no. V'targelenu b'sar sechal means that every single one of us has that connection. And sometimes we're able to tap into that connection. Sometimes we're able to tap into that connection. We're completely zoned out, completely focused. I have to say, I wish that it would happen to me more often. But every once in a while, I'm zochah to have that where I'm so focused in there, and I wish, how it would happen more often. So focused that when I get up, when I look up, and I'm wait, what time is it? How did that time just transfer? There are stories of Gedolim. I don't remember if it was the Stipler of Shach or who I read this by, where they one of the grandsons was with the gadol, and he made him a cup of coffee at 11:45. At 3 a.m., the grandson goes over back to the gadol and be Saba, Zaidi, Grandpa, can I make you a cup of coffee? And he's like, what do you mean? You literally just made me one. And he was like, that was 4 hours ago. It's that was 4 hours ago. Where did the time go? He's the time when you zone in, all of a sudden, the world outside you stops. And for people who could comprehend this, imagine that you're very enveloped in something. You're listening to something, you're reading something, you're havdil alfei elef adalts, you're watching something. And all of a sudden you're wait, how long was that? That was so good, I was so enveloped in it. That's the level that you have to be when you're learning Torah. When you're so just sucked in that you can't, everything else is wait, that was an hour? I can't believe, we just sat here for an hour learning, about, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. which is actually pretty close where we are. 50 minutes. We were just sitting, you were like, what? That was that long? Like, it just, like, sort of like, you get so enveloped in it. That's the goal. That should be your focus. And you might not be able, but you could try for 5 minutes. And if you're not able to do, there is asay toif, there's doing good, there's adding good, but there's also sur mira, removing from yourself, refraining from doing bad, refraining. Let's say you're not on the level, you can't focus, but you can refrain from doing bad. You can refrain from speaking lashon hara. You can refrain from dressing not tznius. You have a article of clothing, and then you say, you know what, I'm not wearing this today. You could refrain from watching something, from looking at something, from listening to something that maybe you should not do. We have the ability to also do that. We have to realize that we lost a gadol. There is so much lacking in our world. Nobody could replace that. But collectively, if we all just add a little bit more, we could do something. I have to say something beautiful that's happening in my community in Jackson, New Jersey. Jackson, New Jersey is doing something amazing that from now until Pesach, the entire community is trying to finish the entire Bavli and make a Siyama Shas by Erev Pesach. Just like Reb Chaim used to go do it, and that was just like, it's unbelievable. I thought it was amazing. Such an amazing thing to do. Like to go and tap into that. I don't know if it's only for the community. Maybe you could go and join even if you're outside the community. But it's something that the community as a whole went and decided to do. They finished the entire Shas in just a few weeks' time, collectively. Because this is what Reb Chaim did. We're missing this in the world. There's a lot of stories that came out, and then there's a lot of people that I've spoken to where are like, oh well, I went to a rabbi and the gadol didn't give me this, bro, and didn't come true, and didn't, So I want to put a point on emunas chachamim, and this is something that we spoke about in, I don't remember how long ago, but pretty recent, that the Gemara in Ksubas, page 103b goes and says that tzaddik geyser HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. When a tzaddik decrees something, HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfills that decree. And again, in Moed Katan, page 16b goes and says that the tzaddik has the power to annul a divine decree. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says in Sefer Erchas Yosher, he goes and he says that a gadol himself, if he makes a mistake, or the person misunderstands what the gadol says, the blessing still takes effect as long as the person has strong, unwavering emunas chachamim. There's a level when you get a bracha from a gadol that you have to have, and part of that power is your emunah in that bracha. The famous story that we mentioned before of Rav Shalom Chadran, that his son was sick, and he went over to the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish says, go take to a certain river, and that river, you will, that's where you will be healed. So he takes his son to this river, and lo and behold, he was able to be healed. And his son goes and he says, let's spread this information. And he goes and he says, you think we were saved because of this river? He says, you know what? Why you are healed? You are healed because in the merit of emunas chachamim. That's why you are healed. And this really is the idea behind the emunas chachamim. There's a big power in that. And Reb Chaim goes and continues and says the main effect of this bracha, of a bracha b'tzadik, is that if one doesn't believe that it will work, it usually doesn't work. That's the level of the emunas chachamim. So when you go and you start saying, oh, I wonder why I didn't get my bracha, instead of blaming it on the chassid, then maybe you should look into yourself. So there was once an American businessman that, he had a close relationship to a Rosh Kollel in Bnei Brak. And in Bnei Brak, and he calls up one time this Rosh Kollel, and he says that he has a $500,000 lawsuit against him. He was a very successful businessman. So he goes over to the Rosh Kollel. Can you go over to Reb Chaim and can you ask him for a bracha? And he goes over to the to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, this Rosh Kollel, and he gives him the information. He's in a lawsuit, and he explains to him. He says, he goes over to him and he says that this person he didn't do anything wrong, and the problem is with the American system is that even though he can't prove himself that he didn't do anything wrong. He really didn't do anything wrong, but he says because of the system he might be able to be held liable because that's the way the system. It's very hard for him to prove it, and he goes over and the Reb Chaim goes and gives the bracha v'hatzlacha, and the regular bracha that he gives, and a few weeks later, he gets another call and says that they had a court date. They had a court date filled out, and that court date was the 29th of Adar. So he goes back to Reb Chaim, and he goes and he says that the Gemara in Tainis goes in page 29b goes and says, I mentioned that a Jew should be judged in the month of Adar because then it's a good mazel for the Jew. So he goes, and Reb Chaim goes and gives him another bracha that it should be well. A short while after the court date was set, as is customary, this Jewish businessman goes and he gets a notice that says that they're willing to settle for $200,000. So this businessman is thinking. And he says, for $200,000, I'm not willing to settle. That's a lot. But $100,000, I'm willing to settle. I'm willing to make this all go away for $100,000. So he goes, and before he's about to send his response to Reb Chaim, he goes over. Before he goes and sends his response to his lawyer, he goes over to Reb Chaim and he says he wants to get a bracha from Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim hears it, he says, what? You want to pay $200,000? He says, absolutely not. He says, go to court. Go to court. Don't worry about it. And at this point, the businessman said, was thinking, he's like, at one point he just wanted to make it all go away, and $100,000 he was willing to do. But, Reb Chaim said something, so he says, you know what, I'm going to listen to Reb Chaim. And he declines, the settlement offer of $200,000. And he says, let's go to court. It was a few days before the court date, and then all of a sudden there was another message that came in from the other lawyer and said that they're willing to settle the case for just $18,000. The businessman was so happy, he wrote a check right then and there for $18,000 and closed the case. And the businessman told his lawyer, he called the Rosh Kollel, he says, the law fees, the court fees in itself would have cost me more than $18,000. So I just closed the whole thing off for $18,000. So he goes over to the Rosh Kollel, he says, I want you to please go to Reb Chaim Kanievsky and just say thank you, and this is how it ended. So the Rosh Kollel goes back to Reb Chaim Kanievsky and he says, by the way, this is how it ended. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky listens to it, smiles, and he says he deserves to have been saved. So the Rosh Kollel says, what do you mean he deserves? With all due respect, the Rav never met this man before. Besides all the information from the story. So Reb Chaim goes and he says, the fact that he followed instructions, the fact that he followed instructions that he's given, for this alone, he's worthy of the salvation. Meaning that the fact that he listened to Emunas Chachamim, that itself warrants a salvation. How many times do you go and you ask a bracha and you wonder, the rabbi didn't get answered? Well, hold on a second. Before you blame the rabbi, look at yourself. Maybe that's the reason. Even though, you look at someone, Reb Chaim, no one's asking, okay, is the brachas came true? Because, 10 out of 10 times, you could take it to the bank, whatever Reb Chaim says. There was, I know it's getting a little bit late, but do I have to continue? I can't. Should I stop it and do 2 classes on this? I don't know. Should we do it? It's getting so late. Oh yeah, I have so much more to speak about. You know what? I'm gonna have to split it into 2 classes, and I have to tell you why. I'll tell you why my thought process is that way. Is because I could go on here for another at least 35 minutes. And, to go, I hear me, I want to continue, but I'll tell you what the problem is. First of all, I'll tell you 2 things. Number 1, I realized, when I rush through things, because it gets late, it doesn't come out the way that it needs to. I feel like in myself, it doesn't come out the way that it needs to. And I need a lot more time in this to get there's so much to speak about Reb Chaim. And usually I would have just, closed this. But because it's Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and I personally feel so connected, I personally feel so connected, I want to do it justice. And not only that I'm probably going to go and do more research. I see so many people want me to continue. I'm sorry, I want to, I don't know what to do. I have to say that I have people coming to my house also in 20 minutes to, so I want to continue, but I know if I start, I'm not going to be able to finish. So I can't. I'm in between. What I used to do is I used to just rush through it. I used to take my fast talking and put it on my fast talking on double speed, so nobody can understand what I'm saying. Unless you're on high end caffeine or on cocaine or something like that, then you can maybe understand me. And so just to get through it. But one thing I realized is that it has to be done properly, and I'm actually surprised I only got to here. I thought, when I was preparing this, I was like, okay, I'll probably get into here. But I didn't do. But I need to. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to have to do it. I wanted to do stuff on Pesach, but I'm sorry. I'm going to have to continue on Chaim Kanievsky next week. I just have to. But before we close off and we open up for questions, and we have to realize that, I went on to Torah Anytime throughout the week, and there's so much on Chaim Kanievsky. There's so much information out there. There's so much people just speaking about, him. And we're all listening to it. We're all learning from it. We have to take one point that I would love for you to go and take out from this. And that is, and if you take out this, then it was worth it. This was really my main focus. And that is that when we hear all these amazing stories and these amazing things that happen in his life, we have to realize, how is that going to change my life? It's not enough to hear a story and be like, wow, that was nice, okay, cool. That's crazy. No, we have to take everything and put it into our own lives. We have to change our own lives. And really, this is a lot that I was going to speak about a little bit later, but this is something that we really have to think about. We lost a gadol. We lost someone so huge. So let us change our lives even a little bit. Please, I'm begging every single one of us, just do something a little bit. Maybe daven a little bit with extra kavanah. Maybe learn a little bit with extra kavanah. Maybe add something. Just do something small. Do something small and do it Leila Nishmas the Gadol Adar. Do it Leila Nishmas Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Do it. There's so much. There's so much that we could tap into. There's so much that we need to tap into. There's really so much that it is required of us, and it's such, listen to everybody that speaks about Reb Chaim. It's such a powerful thing. I really wanted to go and speak about the continuing my series on the 10 Makos, but I feel like for next week, I think this is more important. I'm going to speak about it more, and I really want to speak more about B'ezrat Hashem next week, more about his relationships, more in the chesed aspect of his relationship with his wife, about his relationship with his father, different things of not just the learning aspect of Reb Chaim, but more than that, there's a lot more that comes into it. So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll speak about that next week. May this neshama be in maybe this shir, I can't even think straight, be an aliyah to his neshama. Not that he needs it, by all means, but the Torah, there's so many levels that you could always gain more. With that. Actually, before we do that, we'll also ask that he should be a tremendous Melid Tziyotcha, just like he was a tremendous help to us over here in this world. May he also be a tremendous help for us also in the next world. Okay, let's open up for some questions, and then we'll end it off. I can't believe that it's so late. Where does the time go? Okay, first question. Only question. One question. What is the proper way to mourn, and what can we take upon ourselves in the Rav's merit? Okay, so what is the proper way to mourn? It's very, very important. I don't know whoever was able to listen to the Levaya. I thought it was it's something that I felt like I couldn't go without. I put my alarm to wake up early for the Levaya, but I woke up an hour earlier, and I just couldn't fall back asleep. I just couldn't. I was up at 5 or something on Sunday, waiting for it, for the Levaya. And the proper way to mourn is, first of all, listen to the Levaya if you're able to. There's a English translation that Torah Anytime did on it, a voiceover. Rabbi Shai Tahan and Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi, I believe, went and they did a a sort of a voiceover in English that you could actually listen to it and actually, get a little bit of a tap into it, into, the Levi aspect, but more and really like shed some tears over a gadol. We lost a gadol, shed some tears. That, but more than that, I would say, well, not more than that, but equal to that is, take upon yourself something. And take upon yourself something that you're able to do. Maybe you're not going to be able to take it for the full, your full life, but maybe see if you're able to do it until the Shloshim, for 30 days. See if you're able to take it until, at least until Erev Pesach, for a few weeks. Try to take upon yourself something. Maybe if you, as a woman, maybe you don't daven mincha, I don't know, whatever it is, tznius, maybe learning a little bit more, learning Hilchos Lashon Hara, Tehillim, just like something that you're able to do, something small that you're able to focus on. Maybe it's just like focusing and concentrating a little bit more on davening. Maybe, have a little bit of that focus, that gadol focus on davening, like just for the first bracha or something like that. Or maybe learn for another 5 minutes. Something that you're able to handle, just try to take upon something. Which gadol could we go to now when we feel like we need that? So Baruch Hashem, we have Tadikim in our generation. Who is on the level of Chaim Kanievsky? I don't know. We have Baruch Hashem Gedalim, we have Reb Gershon Edelstein, we have righteous people. Even Reb Chaim Kanievsky's brother-in-law, Yitzchak Zilberstein. We have Baruch Hashem a lot of tzaddikim in the generation. Who is on the level of Reb Chaim? I don't know. And to say that there's somebody, I don't think there is, to be honest. But who am I to say? But there's a lot of Gedalim, and they mostly reside in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. When you need a deeper insight or that's a great question. Who do we need to go to? Which gadol? I remember when Rav Steinman was nifter. What was that? Maybe 2000. Rav Aaron Steinman in 2017, maybe. I remember Rav Chacham Avodah Yosef was nifter, and then I was like, okay. So I remember thinking, okay, we could go to Rav Steinman, we could go to Rav Chaim. We go. And then Rav Steinman was nifter. I'm like, okay, we could go to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Now that Rav Chaim Kanievsky is nifter, like, I am a nobody, so maybe there's somebody that exists out there, but I wish, if somebody knows, then please share with me. But who exists like that? I don't know that. I don't know how to say this in a nice way, but I don't know if we have. I don't know that we have somebody on this level. Next question. Apart from growing in our learning, what are the tangible things that we could take upon ourselves to reach somewhat of the levels of Reb Chaim? Just like he reaches full potential, how can we reach ours? Okay, fine. So it's very difficult to say how can you reach your... Reb Chaim is somebody that never wasted a second. This is somebody that we could only dream to achieve, but we could try to achieve. So there's different aspects that you could learn from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So the ones that we spoke about today was really focused more on the learning aspect and, well, actually more on miracles that we spoke about. But really there's things that to tap into on the from what we spoke about today. I would probably say not wasting time. That's what I'll probably focus on. And again, maybe we can't we waste our day, but we could make sure we don't waste 30 minutes, or 20 minutes, or 5 minutes, meaning that we do something fully. But how do we reach our potential? That is a lifelong quest. That is not something that I could answer in a simple, one-liner, but it's something that we have to consistently and constantly strive for and to achieve greatness in our lives, whether it's between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our avodas Hashem, whether it's between us and our relationships, between us and our spouses, our children, our friends, our families, our parents, our neighbors, our bosses, our partners, our employees, our employers. There's so many different aspects that we have to achieve, greatness in, and in all areas we need to achieve, we need to work on. I really could expand a lot about that, but we can make a whole 20 minutes on that. But let's move on to the next question. Should we say a shechianu on new clothing that we brought secondhand from the thrift store? That's a good question because technically it's new to you. It's possible depending on the type of clothing. Because some clothing you do say shechianu and some clothing you don't say shechianu for. Are there any gedolim that see women for brachos? I believe there are in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, I know of one. I don't know if he wants to be publicized, but if you reach me offline, I could tell you who it was, that I went with my wife, and he gave us both a bracha. Okay. Okay, next. I heard something about him being against the wigs. I don't know in what particular fashion of it, but possibly. But wigs is a very sensitive topic, and there's a lot to discuss on it. So I'm going to sort of skip over that question, because it really depends on what you're saying. And I'm trying to remember what there was. There was a certain area, but this was like, a while back when there was a certain situation with wigs on Avodah Zarah back then. Okay, next. I know that we're not allowed to daven to a person by their cave. Are we allowed to ask a tzaddik to ask Hashem for us, or should we focus more on asking Hashem in their merit? So we're asking Hashem in their merit. So the question is, we don't daven to a tzaddik, but can we daven to a tzaddik can we daven to Kadosh Baruch Hu in the merit of the tzaddik? That's for sure. But also, when you do something in merit of a tzaddik, that also the tzaddik sort of, I can't say owes you, but sort of wants to do something for you as well, because you did something for the tzaddik. So there is an aspect of that, and B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, I want to touch about this next week as well. Today was the yahrzeit of the Noam Elimelech. Wow, that's amazing. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know that. Why am I even more embarrassed? Because my wife is a direct descendant from the Noam Elimelech. So, thank you for bringing that up. That's embarrassing that I didn't know that. Okay, next. What about 36 hidden tzaddikim? Are they necessary? Should live in Israel according to the Torah? Okay, 36 hidden tzaddikim is a very big topic in itself. We had some questions previously. Do they know who they are? Do they not know who they are? So there are tzaddikim that exist. And by the way, there's plenty of tzaddikim that exist today. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of tzaddikim that exist today. But there's a level that Reb Chaim Kanievsky had that we don't have. Like the miracles that happened through him, the things that he said that, and B'ezrat Hashem, now I have another week. I'm going to try to do a little bit more research and learn a little bit more about more stories. There's so much miracles that come out that nowadays, who exists like that? I don't know. And if you know somebody, I beg of you, please share with me, because I want to know who else that I could go to. But, at the end of the day, I don't know if we have someone like Reb Noam, Reb Chaim Kanievsky caught me off. So there was a question here: who was the Noam Elimelech? Noam Elimelech was Rabbi Elimelech Milizhinsk. That he had his brother Rav Zusha, big tzaddikim in back in Poland, I believe in Poland if I'm not mistaken, that they did a lot for Klal Yisrael. Lived in poverty, went from place to place. There's so many stories. In fact, I still remember that as a child, my father would read to us, me and my brother, stories of Rav Noach Elimelech and Rav Zisha, who were brothers of their story before bedtime. That was our bedtime story. These were the stories that we read. My father had a certain sefer. I have to actually ask him about it. He's probably going to listen to it, so he'd probably reach out to me. Like, there's a certain sefer that he had of stories of Rav Noam Elimelech and Rav Zisha. But that was our bedtime stories. But they did tremendous amount of like tzaddikim, like in this time that they went through so much suffering, like unbelievable. But he was why is he called the Noam Elimelech? Because he wrote a sefer called the Noam Elimelech, a very, very popular sefer on the Torah, called the Noam Elimelech, and there's a lot of schools associated with that. But it basically was a big tzaddik, but he was known as the Noam Elimelech, otherwise known as Rabbi Elimelech Milizhinsk. Okay. Oh, we have one last question. Does the grave of tzaddikim have merit, have power? Yes, there is power, there is merit in the going to pray by the tzaddikim's graves, and B'ezrat Hashem we'll touch upon this B'ezrat Hashem next week, that you go to pray by a tzaddik's graves and you go daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the merit of the tzaddik. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please answer my tefillos. Okay, all right. Hi, thank you all for joining. Oh, one last question. What about the concept about a tzaddik suffering to pay for our sins? Okay, that's a sensitive. Tzaddik suffering for our sins. There is a concept that that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes away a tzaddik from this world to atone from sins from, let's say, a big punishment that's happening in this world. So you ask a question similar to Christianity. So yes and no. So the way that from the Torah perspective. So let's back up. From the Christian perspective, they claim that JC died for their sins. So if you believe in JC, he died for your sins. You don't have to deal with it. That's completely against the Torah. Meaning that if a tzaddik dies, what does it mean? It has a kapara on the generation, meaning that there was a very big bad gzera that was supposed to happen, and the tzaddik was nifter, and that takes away the gzera. But that doesn't mean that all the averos, all the sins of Klal Yisrael, whoever, each and every single one of us, that just goes away. We still have to do tshuva, and that's a requirement. From the Christian perspective, there's no aspect of tshuva, repentance. You believe in JC, and that he died for your sins, and that's it. From the Jewish perspective, even if a tzaddik dies and it is mechaper a Klal Yisrael, but there is an aspect that you still have to do tshuva. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay for all those averos. There's no such thing as a tzaddik could take you away from the all the averos that you did. You just the tzaddik just took care of it. You're responsible from everything. So there is a big difference in it. I know I answered it very briefly, but I believe that it is a sufficient answer. Amen on the bracha, which is may all the tzaddikim be a bracha and Yeshua for the entire Klal Yisrael. Amen to that. I want to wish you all a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week, and may we be able to be zeicha to greet Mashiach and to greet all our tzaddikim of the previous generation to, really, I'll say this in a different way, that may we all merit to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just a minute percentage of the way that these Gedolim were able to merit that connection. Yashikayach, thank you all for joining, and until next week.